been highlighted in the local dailies. Of course, not just that, we'll have our themed topical discussions later on during the broadcast. This time round, we center on your health. A lot of clamor around the vaccines, immunization and all that. We'll definitely delve into the COVID-19 vaccine, the distribution aspect. Definitely interesting, bearing in mind it was just flagged off last week. What is the progress so far, and when will you get vaccinated? I guess that's the big question. We'll definitely have all the answers. The government spokesperson will be joining us later on during this particular broadcast. But of course, as usual, we want to start with what has been covered in the dailies. Before we take a look at what's happening locally, let's highlight what's ongoing on the international pages. Let's begin with the Daily Monitor at first, highlighting the latest from Uganda right now, even as it is revealed that Kampala is a robbery hotspot where the gangs mainly target business people who are coming from the bank. One of the issues right there, even as Museveni has betrayed the blood of our people. That's according to Bobi Wine, who's calling for peaceful protests and insists he won the hotly contested election with 54.19% of the valid votes cast. So a lot of emphasis going on there. We'll definitely keep an eye on the peaceful protest being encouraged by Bobi Wine. Over to the Citizen, let's highlight what's happening in Tanzania briefly. Total boss speaks out on East Africa crude oil pipeline queries. That's one of the stories where the French oil giant chief executive is actually acknowledging that the company's oil projects in Uganda represent significant social and environmental stakes. Do make sure you grab yourself or you're adequately informed on what has been highlighted on the Citizen. We have more information there. What else? Has Kenya banned from her market? The East Africa Community Bloc is trying to come to terms with that particular decision, which has caused quite a stir. Kenya's decision to ban imports of maize into her market on medical grounds. We'll definitely highlight that later on. Let's take a look at what's happening in Rwanda. On Rwanda today, the impact of the virus on mental health. Now, a mini survey around Kigali found that more households are suffering from anxiety, fear, panic, depression, and suicidal thoughts. All this impact of the pandemic. And we'll definitely take a look at this even as we appreciate the journey 1 year on ever since the pandemic hit this particular region. South Africa's ANC leaders meet defiant Zuma over graft hearing. We well know of the issues surrounding the former president, where Zuma is actually, where the judicial panel is actually seeking to have Zuma jailed for 2 years for contempt of court in respect to that particular court case. Over to the East African right now. Burundi's president pardons 5,000 prisoners. That's the latest from Burundi, where last year he pardoned 4 journalists. And perhaps let's take a look at what has been covered on, well, still on the page. Tanzania gears up to test SGR power system, where Tanzania's Railway Corporation plans to start testing the standard gauge railway electricity systems over 3 months. Interesting news from Tanzania. Over to CNN World News. Let's take a look at what they've highlighted on their page in terms of the latest happening around the world. Of course, a lot of emphasis given on that Equatorial Guinea blast that happened in one of the barracks, where witnesses say the devastation is like the aftermath of an atomic bomb. Over 90 people dead, and of course more affected. We'll definitely continue highlighting that, but more on the CNN page, even as the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and his wife have tested positive for COVID-19. That's the latest coming from the international scene. Of course, we'll definitely continue keeping an eye on that for you. But let's cross over to the local dailies now. And as usual, we highlight what has been covered on the Standard, the Daily Nation, as well as the Business Daily, perhaps. But let's start with the Standard, the front page, all to do with Raila's options, as well as what has been covered on the Daily Nation front page. Raila has been taken ill and advised to go into isolation. But with the Standard, if things fall apart, in the aftermath of the last weekend's outburst by close associates of the two handshake partners. Allies have been quick to dismiss fears raised as a mere storm in a teacup. But what exactly would happen if push comes to shove and the ODM leader exited the handshake? Standard explores the options available to the Orange Supremo. That's among the stories highlighted on the Standard. And of course, joining me in studio to help us deliberate on this matters that have been covered in the dailies. Already in studio, I'm joined by Musari Kahiga, who's a public policy analyst. A very good morning to you, sir.
Morning, Jesse. How are you?
A very fine, thank you.
Excellent.
I think let's plug in on the latest that has been covered on the front page. Of course, this coming in the backdrop of the 3-year anniversary of the handshake. Definitely, we don't know whether it's storm in a teacup or these are real issues that might affect the handshake going forward. Perhaps your quick reaction to the scenes we witnessed over the weekend where close associates of Raila Odinga actually raised some issues around the process of the BBI and going forth into 2022.
Well, Jesse, first and foremost, I want to say thank you very much. But secondly, I want to begin by wishing the ODM party leader best well wishes. He's been through tougher things. I'm sure he'll come out fine, as he's hospitalized today, but I'm sure he'll be out soon. Going back on the idea of the collapse of the handshake, I think, Jesse, let's be very sincere. We went to the handshake on the 9th of March, that's about 3 years ago. And it's because this country was in turmoil. So unless we're about to state that the stability of this country is negotiable, then the handshake is as solid as it can possibly be. There might be varied opinions on both sides of the advisors to the president, as well as to the ODM party leader, on how to proceed on effectuating the bypass, the BBI. Mm-hmm. But I don't see this particular problems, these teething problems, being enough to completely shake the basis of the handshake. I don't think that would happen.
So according to you, it's just teething problems, a storm in the teacup?
Yes, I think it's a storm in the teacup, depending on where you're sitting.
Okay.
Of course, we're living in a political reality, so there are people who would like to take advantage of this storm in the teacup and probably turn it around and make it into a whirlwind. But for now, the two leaders are saying, calm down. The troops might have been a bit anxious, as is normal in politics.
Okay.
But I think the two leaders have said, look, everybody calm down. We're still within a good measure of achieving the BBI and the ideals of the handshake.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's look forward. Of course, the Standard is actually evaluating in case push comes to shove and the ODM leader exited. What do you think this spells for the journey going forward in terms of the Building Bridges initiative and perhaps the entrance of the Super 7, as they're commonly referred to? My guests have already started the waters.
Look, let us separate the BBI, the Building Bridges Initiative, which is now a constitutional process, from the persons who were involved in the handshake. The ODM party leader has been on television severally and in public saying that the public should really separate the matters which are within BBI from himself, from his person. So has the president. That being said, there might be some form of discomfort during the process of the implementation of the referendum end of this process. But I don't think that either of the parties, whether within the Big Seven or just within the Big Two, I don't think that either of the parties would be willing to throw away the 9 agenda items because of a disagreement within the handshake arrangement. So I want to say this, that when it comes to Raila's options, and out of continuous study of this political leader, it's clear that Raila is actually a master of contingencies, not exactly one who believes in the accumulation of assets. So I think he'll be able to work within the constraints, whatever they are.
Okay, that's interesting. We'll definitely continue keeping tabs on that. Of course, it's making the front page of the Standard and the Daily Nation, just interrogating the state of the handshake. Of course, 3 years on, even as the the Daily Nation rather focuses on the health factor. ODM leader had complained of fatigue after the 5-day coast tour, but tests did not return positive for COVID. Of course, we'll definitely continue monitoring that particular issue. Yes, so allow me to bring into the conversation Sakwa Bunyasi, Member of Parliament for Nambale constituency. It would be good to interrogate your take, Heshimiwa, on this particular issue. We've seen a couple of issues brought forth by perhaps the foot soldiers of one of the handshake principles. What does this mean for the handshake 3 years on, and perhaps does it spell any issues for the Building Bridges initiative process? What's your take on this?
Jesse, thank you very much for getting me in. First of all, Jesse, that has surprised me a bit, the outburst by my colleagues, particularly in the ODM over the weekend, indicating that something must have shaken them that was probably not apparent to the public. It was after the by-elections in Western, in Matungu and in Kabuchai, and there seems to have been a shock and surprise at the outcomes. So it seems like maybe there are parallel paths on this, what we have seen in the public domain, about simply trying to get the BBI process out of the way. But it looks like it's probably tied to more than that. Maybe it's tied to 2022. And I found the outburst unfortunate. It's more than a storm in a teacup. I think it was bordering on an attempt to, I would say, either intimidate or, in fact, hold hostage almost the entire country. I think that if there are disputes, if there is a change in expectations, the parties involved ought to have, if they can't meet, pick the phone and sort it out. We can't allow people to sort of threaten that if things don't happen the way they want, they'll go back to where they were in 2018. The country can't run like that. Even the President Uhuru have difficulty leading with a big dagger over his head. I don't think it should work like that. I think we have reached a process of solution through negotiation and discussion, and it ought to stay there. I think there's a time when statesmanship is needed, but we can't run a country on the basis of threats and intimidations. If you don't do this, now what about the millions of the Kenyans that are silent? So I don't think just a storm in a teacup. I think we are trying to sort of pass over it, gloss over it. But I think it's a matter that requires background discussion and open discussion in the background, because this is a matter that can be resolved. It looks like I think there were wounded egos, and maybe there are changed outcomes, or there's a fear that the 2022 path that originated in the handshake may be having difficulties. That's my take, Jesse.
Of course, we'll definitely continue monitoring this. What do you have to say, Musari Kahiga?
Just if I may say something, we must be intellectually honest, especially on national TV. Honorable Bunyasi, I think, is one of the people we talked about earlier when I said they're going to take advantage of the story in the teacup for their own political reasons. But let's be clear that Matungu was an ANC-held constituency, as so was Kabuchai.
Yeah.
So as far as we're concerned, we don't understand why ANC is excited to have retained their own constituency, and why they would want to draw out every other single political actor in this country because they won their own constituency. These are the kind of things that become convolutions that are drawn into a constitutional debate and actually stand and border on sycophancy.
Okay, well, that's interesting, but many might argue that the input of the state machinery, perhaps in advantage of one particular party, might have caused these particular issues to simmer, of course, and boil over. But let's bring in Suleiman Bashir, who's an advocate, already joining us in studio right now. Of course, we're deliberating on the state of the handshake, even as we appreciate that page 6 of The Standard has covered this particular story. What if things were to fall apart and Raila balls out of the handshake? So give us your take. We've definitely seen some wrangles. Others might argue a storm in the teacup. Others are definitely issuing that this is a sign of bigger cracks within the handshake. What's your take on this?
You see, Jesse, after all, when the two principals shook hands before, there was a silent agreement between the two before they made it public on the 7-point agenda. There were a few issues that they had resolved upon, but right now where we are having third parties who are now coming in between the two, who might even take advantage of this and carry the day. I think the discomfort that we had seen on the part of ODM, especially on the part of the former Prime Minister, it's quite reasonable in my view, because these are now, in his quote-unquote strangers, who are now coming to maybe meddle up with what two people had agreed upon. So I think going forward, and especially with what we had witnessed with the recent by-election, the kind of impact that these political renegades are coming, we shall bring on the table, shall influence or turn things upside down for him. So that kind of discomfort is something that had been anticipated by majority of Kenyans. But I think going forward, the whole thing that they need to construe upon should be, what is the way forward? The thing is, if there are very good agendas that they can discuss and see how they can forge upon to maybe carry the day, I think it will be quite fair on their part. So in my view, and I think going forward, this kind of discomfort is something that had been anticipated, but the whole agenda or the whole question is what can be done on the way forward or on going forward. And I think the person who can lead the country in a better way is the present president, that's President Uhuru Kenyatta, because he is the one who is not interested in maybe being in office maybe for another term, constitutionally speaking. So I think the way forward is for him to maybe lead the new entrants vis-a-vis the former Prime Minister who has been his handshake partner. And that is how I think the country shall unify going forward.
But how do you deal with perhaps people within your ranks who might be trying to influence the choice of the successor come 2022 if you're president?
You see, Jesse, this is politics. And as a political leader, there are very important people within your circles who shall every single day influence your mind, who shall tell you this is the right option, this is the wrong option. But ultimately, the ball stops with him. He is the one to make the choice that he thinks, that he deems fit. You see, when we look at the discomfort that had been raised by Siaya Senator, that is quite reasonable. You see, when you see the likes of Gideon Moi going to Northeastern, pulling masses, addressing the people, trying to influence them, the former Prime Minister feels quite uncomfortable because these are now young leaders who are now coming to take up his place, in his view, I think. But the most important part, as I said, is for President Uhuru Kenyatta, while retaining the former Prime Minister on the table, to bring the others on the table. The whole agenda should be unifying the country, and I think that is the way forward.
Okay, Sakwa Bunyasi, and perhaps this is a question that might resonate with many Kenyans right now, bearing in mind what we've just seen in the past couple of days. Is it possible to separate BBI and 2022 politics, according to you?
No, it's not. It's not just it. It isn't. We can conceptualize about it. We can talk about it sequentially, however we do it, but you can't keep the human mind on something that seems to be a done deal now. People are saying, so then what? These two issues were then and still are interlinked. And that's why you could see the depth of anger after Matunga. And I'm shocked that one of the commentators seems to think there should be no excitement since ANC retained and for the K retained their seats. But if that is the case, then why all this anger and frustration? Obviously, those are not the expected outcomes. And let's not talk about just the outcomes of last week. This is a political process that's supposed to change the nature of governance. The governance itself is going to be in place either next year in 2022. Why would it not be linked? That's one. And two, I don't think we should assume as if the players on the scene are going to be a set of managed pawns. This is going to be a wide open process. As soon as you clear out the BBI, for example, it's going to be a wide open process saying if this is the new dispensation, then what do we do to occupy it? And political parties are going to be looking around to what to do. So I really think that telling Kenyans not to link the two is, no, first it's not correct. We know it's not. Because the two are intimately linked. And you can see that from the public reactions.
Okay, that's interesting. Perhaps let me get the take of Musari Kahiga as we conclude on the option of the handshake 3 years on. What's your take on this? Can we delink the BBI and 2022 politics?
I think we should be able to attempt to delink the BBI and the 2022 politics. The fact that there will be a new constitutional dispensations means that political parties will have to adjust. They'll adjust their structures, they'll adjust their financing, they'll adjust their operations. This is clear. However, this is not the first handshake. This is not the first handshake in this country. Mm-hmm. There's been a history of handshakes. And those handshakes have often brought tumultuous change in the political management of this country. I want to start from 1998, when the NDP-KANU merger began. This is a point where no one in Africa thought that an opposition leader could shake the hand of a leader within the ruling party. But through this handshake, KANU itself experienced much more growth of democratic systems within itself, which later birthed the NAC revolution that came in 2002. I want to go again into 2007. We did have another handshake between Raila Odinga and Mwai Kibaki. Again, today we're enjoying the fruits of the 2010 constitutional dispensation. That came from that handshake. And today, we're talking about 2017, another handshake. Raila Odinga again, reaching out, being the bigger person, though aggrieved, reaching out. And so this country today is talking about a handshake, but the person who keeps walking across the floor to shake hands, even when aggrieved, is Raila Amolo Odinga.
Okay, interesting. Perhaps, what do you have to say, Bwana Wakili?
I think when you look at the promoters of the BBI initiative, we have the former Prime Minister and President Uhuru Kenyatta. Those are the champions of the Building Bridges initiative. Any amendment that shall be occasioned on the Constitution shall be celebrated or shall be championed majorly by the two. Any influence that the amendment of the potential amendment of the Constitution, any impact that it will have on the masses in influencing the minds of the Kenyans, the people who are quote unquote and most likely to be the champions are the two, because this bill has emanated as a result of the handshake of the two. I think the discomfort that we're seeing is these third parties are now coming in to maybe take the credit for amending the Constitution. I think this is a move that had been championed by two people. In the event this sails through, in as much as the amendment shall bind each and every single Kenyan, the promoters are the two. We were not conversant with what they discussed in that 2-hour meeting that they had prior to the handshake. So I think there are things that we need to set right. The Constitution, when you look at Articles 255 and 257, each and every Kenyan can amend the Constitution. This amendment has been fronted by the two, which they are the champions, and I think that is what we need to appreciate.
Okay, even as we appreciate that, let's appreciate the fact that Uasin Gishu County Ward Reps had actually taken the middle path on this particular BBI bill, and they chose to abstain from voting on the Building Bridges Initiative bill. Let me bring in Sakwa Bunyasi, even as you give us your comment on this particular stand by the Uasin Gishu Ward Reps. It would be proper to note that members of parliament are set for talks on public engagement on the Constitutional of Kenya Amendment Bill 2020. Just perhaps you can give us an input on how exactly the modalities will be conducted on public participation.
Yeah, I think that's a matter that is up for discussion. And sorry, let me just start by saying that of course, we all must give due credit to the two principals for setting aside their egos and differences to shake hands. It is not one person that walked across. You can walk across and find the other party missing. I think it was a willingness. I got the impression that each walked somewhere into the middle of the room and shook hands, or in front of Arambe House. So that, I think, is credit due to them, and I don't think we need to dispute that in any way at all. But back on this question of public participation, it looks very obvious at what level when you think about public participation, the process in which you consult voters to offer their opinions on the proposal. But you know, the nature in which it is done could influence the outcome. It's like civic education. So you can educate one way or the other. So there is some concern that it must be done in a way that achieves the outcome, which is that they must go say the way the county is, so they must come out and say that we do support this, and that there should not be much room for deviation. I think there is some nervousness as to how that might all work, even though it looks like it should be straightforward. Finally, the arbiter is the Kenyan people themselves, and you lay bare the facts, if they can call them facts, and let them choose, let the chips fall where they may after they're chosen. But that's not that's not the expectation. The expectation is that it must be a process that affirms what has been agreed. And that's why there is nervousness on this. In Washington Gishu, I think they're trying to toe the tight line, not come out on either side. I thought it was quite unique what they're attempting to do in Washington Gishu. I really think we are missing an opportunity to allow a political process to be debated at institutions closer to the people fully. But what has happened is there's been a speed in saying yes. People are trying to say, one county is saying, we were the very first ones to do this, and therefore we ought to receive some goodies, as it were. Use my own words. But I think that the reality of the matter is that the counties are wondering, if we go this way, how does it affect 2022? And I may not be the only ones that are concerned about it. Maybe other people behind them. And that's why you get that kind of moving on the fence sort of approach that Washington is taking.
Okay, that's interesting. And perhaps they also thought that since it doesn't have any impact to the process, why not just abstain from voting? But of course, it's definitely involved with the political matters in the national scene. Let's take a short break, gentlemen. Of course, I'm joined by Musari Kahiga, who's a public policy analyst, Suleiman Bashir, advocate, as well as Bunyasi Sakwa, Nambale Member of Parliament. We'll definitely come back and continue taking a look at what has been covered in the local dailies. Stay with Morning Express.